Well, hello, everyone. I think this video might be a little out of date because it still had Britain in it. So this is one of the many items you can see on YouTube produced by European Union or European Union affiliated organizations promoting European Union perspectives, providing information. So let's see here. And that's it. Subsidiarity, the principle that the European Union should only be required to do what it's absolutely necessary for the European Union to do. That if European Union institutions should only have responsibility for areas that
doing this 4-second method before
that the European Union should only undertake responsibilities that the member states decide that the European Union is most effectively positioned to undertake those responsibilities. Or to rephrase another way, that the European Union region, in making policies that affect people of Europe, that the lowest level of government that's closest to the people that can undertake and fulfill a responsibility should be the level of government that takes the responsibility. So to rephrase, as I said earlier, that means that the European Union institutions should only have responsibility over policy areas if the members of the European Union decide that that's the best way to deal with the problem. But there has to be agreement that an issue area, like for example, climate change requires a European Union response is the most effective way to address the challenge to achieve the prosperity, security, and well-being of the peoples of the European Union. Okay, so today we have our 2-hour class, and we have our first in-class debate. And Ella will be going up against me, I think, as I recall. But before I forget, let's do the smart attendance. And your smart attendance number is 642. 642. So down the microphone. Go to back to chatting. 642. Chatting 642. Here's your smart attendance number. Okay, so that is our smart attendance number. And I think just about everybody here in this class is signed up for a debate. If you haven't, of course, you know where to do that. So you go to, let's see, you go to, no, but open up another Google Drive here and go to Drive, and you can see where I have put the European Politics and Society debate sign up. And I think so, yes, we have it. Ella, I am going to be pro, so that means I speak 3 times on this topic. To South Koreans, if Europe can Europeanize, then Asia can Asianize. And Ella will be con. And we'll do that during the 2nd hour. And then Gloria has already signed up for next week. And so Sarah has signed up. And that leaves Anais. So Anais needs to sign up for a debate. She can sign up against Katya, Gloria, or Sarah, or choose me as her debate opponent. And let's go back then to the, oh, I forgot. I gotta always remember that you can't see the screen unless I am sure to keep sharing it over and over again like this. So there you can see that Ella is today, and then Katya Gloria is next week from today, next week. And then, and so there you can see the sign-up sheet. And okay, and your final draft of your midterm papers due a week from tomorrow, right? Which is Saturday, right? A week from this, tomorrow is next Saturday. Okay, so let me again close this off, and let's go back to the lessons notes for the week's reading, which is chapters 12 and 13 of Europeanization. And again, make sure I'm sharing the screen. So somebody has here, yeah, okay, so there we go to share screen. And here we see pretty much where we left off at the last class. And so I guess I should try to recall where we stopped at the last class. But these are the first chapters that are the conceptual overview of Europeanization. And so they are focusing more on presenting some conclusions about what Europeanization means. And Europeanization is used as a synonym to refer to European integration. And highlighting that I think we finished talking about how the British have always been, when they were within the European Union, advocating the European Union being more intergovernmental. And so this was the approach when the European Union was not the European Union, when it was still the European Economic Community. It was more intergovernmental, focused on international business and trade. European integration got a big boost by taking the responsibility. We already mentioned subsidiarity, that the best way for European economies to benefit from and defend themselves within the world economy was to work together as a tariff union, as a customs union with the rest of the world. And that was early on in the creation of what became the European community, that the best way for the economies of Europe when confronting the United States and emerging Soviet Union, that these mid-range European powers would best cooperate together to create a single actor in Europe in international trade negotiations, like what was then called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which then in 1995 became the World Trade Organization. So that's an example of a conscious decision that the member states of the predecessor to the European Union decided that, you know, that is something that really we're going to get the most bang for our buck. We're going to get the most benefit if we work together at the European Union level and negotiate and act as a single actor with the European Economic Community in world trade negotiations. And so the British were supportive of that. And when I say the British, what do I mean by the British? I mean, as I think I might have mentioned once before, after the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union broke apart, and the war in Yugoslavia was beginning in 1992, the European Economic Community understood or decided that they needed to accelerate the process of integration, and they formally renamed the European community the European Union at the Treaty of Maastricht. And this was signed in 1993, and I think it came into force I think it came into force in 1994, in the early 1990s. When you sign a treaty, you're supposed to follow it. So it might take several months to go through the formal approval process, but once a country's leader signs a treaty, that country is expected to follow the treaty until it's formally ratified by all the member states, and then it officially happens. But so that's why it's when they negotiated, when they signed it, and the point is that the development and integration of the European community into the European Union, including the creation of a formal commitment to creating two other main foundation stones for the European Union, what we used to call pillars, you know, like the pillars in front of the Supreme Court or an ancient Greek monument. You know, there were three pillars, and the first pillar was the biggest pillar, and that's the European community, which is the economic integration aspect of the European Union. But they added explicitly two other pillars, and this is no longer officially the way in which the European Union describes its policy competencies, but it was kind of unique and cool 30 years ago. The first pillar is the European community. The second pillar is the common foreign and security policy that the European Union, I should say, is committed to creating what they call the CFSP, the Common Foreign and Security Policy. And the third pillar was the Justice and Home Affairs policy. They're going to begin to integrate their border policies, their border control policies, their border control efforts with their border police, immigration, right? That's a been a big topic, particularly in the last 15 years. And so the British agreed to that. The British governments agreed to that, but within British polity, the British political system, there was this emerging resistance and hostility to further integration, intergovernment on a supranational level to create a European Union that would be appearing to move towards some time in the future, some sort of United States of Europe that was evident already when the Soviet Union disintegrated and the Cold War was over, and Margaret Thatcher, who was still Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, was giving expression to this growing British skepticism about the European Union moving towards becoming some sort of federal government, like the United States of America has sovereignty over Ohio, Texas, California, the states. It's so also that the European Union was moving towards becoming or aiming towards some kind of functional goal to become a United States of Europe. And I don't know if I think I might have shown this in class before, but there's a notorious speech by Margaret Thatcher on the eve of her ousting, when she was removed in I think it was 1991, because she was considered to be, well, one of the reasons was she was considered to be too hostile to European integration. So if I go, I don't have the link on my lesson plan, but of course I've used this before in other classes, and if I gotta find this, and it's been heavily watched, this clip. So you can see 1.5, well, actually that's not the, which one is shorter? This one is shorter. Let's look at the shorter one here. And of course I'm thinking about this because I watched this, it is our the Meryl Streep film version of Margaret Thatcher on the plane when I came back from my conference. Meryl Streep made a biography film of Margaret Thatcher. It's all very charming, how charming Margaret Thatcher is. But let me show you this. Let me see, make sure it's sharing, because I have to make sure that it's actually sharing when it says it's sharing. So I go here.
Our purpose to retain the power and influence of this House and not to denude it of many of the powers. I wonder what the right honourable gentleman's policy is in view of some of the things he said. Would he have agreed to a commitment to extend the community's powers to other supplementary sectors of economic integration without having any definition of what they are? Would he? Because you would have thought he would from what he said. One of them was that the Commission wants to extend its powers and competence into the area of health. We said no, we weren't going to agree to those things. And what he says, he sounded as if he would, for the sake of agreeing, for the sake of being little Sir Echo and saying me too. Would he have agreed to extending qualified majority voting within the Council, to delegating implementing powers to the Commission, to a common security policy, all without any attempt to define or limit them? The answer is yes. He hasn't got a clue about the definition of some of the things he is saying, let alone securing a definition of others. Yes, the Commission does want to increase its powers. Yes, it is a non-elected body, and I do not want the Commission to increase its powers against this House. So, of course, we are differing. Of course, the chairman or the president of the Commission, Mr. Delors, said at press conference the other day that he wanted the European Parliament to be the democratic body of the community. He wanted the Commission to be the executive, and he wanted the Council of Ministers to be the Senate. No, No, no. Or, perhaps the Labour Party would give all those things up easily. Perhaps they would agree to a single currency, to total abolition of the pound sterling. Perhaps being totally incompetent with monetary matters, they'd be only too delighted to hand over the full responsibility, as they did to the IMF, to a central bank.
Again, see, referring again to that humiliating period in the 1960s and the early 1970s before she became prime minister, when the Great Britain had to go to the International Monetary Fund for a loan because Britain did not have enough money to pay its international debt obligations. In other words, Britain was going downhill and equating European integration and surrendering Britain's sovereignty to this humiliating period when Britain was at its economic depths of its despair. The mighty British Empire had fallen so low with the loss of the empire, despite winning World War I and winning World War II, still losing the empire. And then this happened when I was a small child. I think it was in the late 60s, early 70s. They had to go to the IMF to ask for a loan, like they're, Argentina or Turkey or Algeria. And so, and of course, this all looked really charming and everything. And then she was ousted. She was ousted soon after this. One of the reasons being because she was seen as too hostile to the European integration. That's not the only reason, but that was one of the reasons. And she was replaced by John Major, who you can see he's sitting there to her left. You can't see him here, but you can see him over here at the beginning. I think you can see him sitting here. He replaced her. And then they had, I think, an election in 1997. You can see him. You can't see him here, but and then Tony Blair, the Labour Party leader, becomes prime minister, and he's supportive of European integration, and he wants to join the Eurozone that's coming up in 1999. But he says first we have to have a referendum on it. And of course, they never do have a referendum. And then he loses eventually. Well, then he steps down after a long period of time, replaced by Gordon Brown. Then Gordon Brown loses, and Labour Party loses to David Cameron. And David Cameron, of course, is the prime minister under the Conservative Party, who then agrees in the political campaign to have a referendum on whether or not to stay in the European Union. The second referendum that Britain has had. They had a referendum in the early 1970s on whether or not to join the European community. And the rest is history. But you can tell she's giving voice to this hostility.
The fact is, they have no competence on money, no competence on the economy. So yes, the right honourable gentleman would be glad to hand it all over. But what is the point in trying to get elected to Parliament only to hand over your sterling and to hand over the powers of this House to you?
So, that sets the stage for Brexit. So to go back to the notes then, and let me see if I can do this without dropping something, because I'm holding three things at once, and go back to the notes here. Keep in mind when the European Union decides, well, after the Maastricht Treaty and the Amsterdam Treaty and the Nice Treaty, we need a draft constitution for the European Union that was then negotiated in 2004 and then voted down by the French in 2005 and by the Netherlands in a referendum, that the Constitutional Convention to create that draft European Constitution Treaty was led by a former French president, a conservative Gaullist French president, Giscard d'Estaing, who, as I mentioned, I think early in the semester, he died of COVID at age 89, early in the, well, yeah, a year ago, he died of COVID. But French president, but his right-hand secretary, who was responsible for overseeing the bureaucratic organization of this Constitutional Convention, was a British civil servant. I mean, the British, they had a reputation, and I think this might have been mentioned briefly in the book, that the British, they had a reputation of public statements like this by Margaret Thatcher and public political figures. But behind the scenes, the British civil service and the British bureaucracy had a reputation of being highly efficient and highly professional. So much so that the British civil servant was given the responsibility of basically like John Madison at the U.S. Constitutional Convention that wrote the U.S. Constitution in 1789. Well, maybe that's an overstatement because Madison actually did a lot of the conceptual work, but this person was given a responsibility, and I can't remember his name, was a British high-level civil servant who was responsible for organizing this thing that Giscard d'Estaing provided his prestige for. And that was always the case, that the British civil service and the British governments were able to get things done, including European Union policies that were adopted. And but all states, that's a focus in this chapter that they make, is that in the UK, France, and Germany, all of these member states have had so-called red lines. In other words, there's certain national interests that they will not go beyond. And of course, these are the power states of the European Union, including not Italy, though. Of course, the book was published before the pandemic began, and or I should say, it was finished before the pandemic began. And I think they're going to tell you that one of these red lines of Germany had been that Germany did not want the European Union to be able to take on international debt through selling Euro bonds, the way the US government sells treasury bonds to investors, and the German government, national government, sells, I think they're called Bunds is their word for it, and the British name for their bonds are gilts, that the European Union would never do that. And Angela Merkel, who had been prime minister until just a couple of months ago, she said no, even after the sovereign debt crisis in 2008, she said no, and then the pandemic happened, and now that red line has moved. In Germany, and it has accepted the fact that the European Union, beginning in June of last year, is now selling 750 billion Euro bonds to international investors. And because this is based upon Germany's fiscal reputation, that the European Union financial system and the European Union banking system is basically built upon Germany's commitment to make that work. And Germany has this stellar reputation for being the most fiscally secure and sound and reliable economic and financial system within the European Union. So that's why, again, as I mentioned earlier, beginning in June of last year, the European Union is now selling Euro bonds at low interest rates because they're basically considered to be German bonds. They don't come out and say that, but the fact that Germany has convinced, along with the cooperation of the other European European Union member states, that has convinced you and me that Germany and the European Union will always make the euro work. That no country will leave the Eurozone. Greece did not leave despite its financial debt crisis. That Germany supports the European Central Bank and do whatever the European Central Bank has to do to make sure that a country is always able to satisfy its national debt obligations by the European Central Bank, if necessary, just printing euros to buy Greek debt bonds that they sell on the debt market. And that was announced by Mario Draghi when he was the second European Central Bank president in 2012, I believe. So 10 years ago, yeah, who is now the prime minister of Italy, who declared that all he said is that we will do whatever it takes to make sure that Greece is able to fulfill its debt obligations. That's all he said. It was very vague, but it was a powerful statement that the European Central Bank, this new young institution, will use its power to just print euros to buy Greek bonds. So you, the investors, know that if you buy Greek bonds, you're going to get paid back because the European Central Bank will always make sure that Greece will never default. And that means Germany will always make sure that Greece will never default. And the way the media covered it, they got fascinated or fixated on this one phrase, Mario Draghi's big bazooka. You know what a bazooka is? It's a gun used to old style anti-tank shoulder-launched missile from, I don't know if they had them during World War II, but afterwards a bazooka. So Mario Draghi's big bazooka, he launched his big bazooka. That the European Central Bank will do whatever it takes to make sure that Eurozone member states never default. And that includes just printing money. But people said, what about inflation? If you're going to just print euros to buy Greek bonds because other investors won't buy them, but you will, then they're just going to print lots of money and you're going to flood the Eurozone with extra money. And when you flood the national economy or the Euro economy with extra money, you get inflation, right? Because it's just money without product to back it up or items to buy. And it hasn't happened. It never happened. Only now, with the pandemic recovery, has the Eurozone inflation become significant. It was for the years and years before the pandemic started, there was always concern about deflation, like what happened in Japan after the early 1990s, that the inflation is not only happening, the prices are going down, steadily down, and that's bad. That's supposedly bad. You want, ideally, about 2% inflation per year. And the European Union was struggling to get at 2% a year until the pandemic occurred. So all the member states, they all have their national interests, and that's an important point to keep in mind. Cyprus is always using its position within the European Union to try to pressure Turkey regarding its occupation of northern Cyprus. Luxembourg always defends its savings banks. Luxembourg is a place known for not focusing too much on where your money comes from if you bring your money there. They call that due diligence, by the way, in business administration classes. You're supposed to do due diligence. Like if you come into my bank with a big suitcase full of money, paper money, I'm supposed to go, where did you get that money from? And Luxembourg, and I guess Switzerland used to be, to some extent, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Cyprus, the Bahamas, what else? Barbados, Panama. They have a reputation of not really looking too closely as to where your money comes from if you bring it into a bank. It's called money laundering. Once it gets into a bank and it's circulated and invested, you buy Euro bonds or gilts, and it's clean. It's too late to find out where it came from. As Spain acts in the EU, Spain is always focused on trying to oppose Basque and Catalan secessionists. Again, the European Union doesn't get enough credit for its successes. We mentioned, for example, how in previous classes, how any explanation has to include, it's not sufficient, but it is necessary to include the role of European integration in contributing to a peace settlement in Northern Ireland, in the troubles that began 60 years ago, or 55 years ago, in the late 1960s, until, well, 2008, with the peace accords, the Good Friday Agreement, that helped contribute to the end of the violence in Northern Ireland. But another case would be the Basques and, to a lesser extent, the Catalans against the central government in Spain because of this Basque separatist nationalist movement, and to a lesser extent, the Catalan movement. European integration is a necessary, again, not sufficient, but it is necessary to explain how the post-Franco government that came to power and the post-Franco authorities have reached a peace agreement. I mean, it wasn't easy. I mean, I read some other book on European Union that the socialist prime minister of Spain in the 1980s, Felipe González, he gave directives to the Spanish secret police to hunt down these Basque so-called terrorists and kill them. This is what was going on in a liberal democratic society under the Socialist Party of Felipe González. They were still waging a dirty war against these Basque quote-unquote terrorists that were supposedly killing, Spanish policemen. Denmark has demanded, of course, that the EU does not lower its environmental policy standards. And of course, that's been a big focus on the European Union, that what does the European Union stand for in the world? Its efforts to preserve the environment, including fighting global warming. Hungary refuses to accept any migrant refugees, and that's been a continuing source of conflict. Of course, now with the war in Ukraine, these disagreements between Hungary and Poland with the European Union have become less significant as everybody's focused upon a common supposed threat, at least more so in the Polish case. I mean, Polish and Poland's commitment to the European Union has become publicly, performatively much more strong in opposing Moscow. Hungary and Viktor Orban has also condemned the Russian invasion, but he still has close economic ties with ruling economic circles in Moscow. So yeah, these national interests can be material or they can be due to discourse. So that's why this course, by the way, is the European Politics and Society. I decided to, when I was asked to teach this class, to focus on the member states. And so the member states still are the dominant actors. It's not the European Commission. It's not the European Parliament. It's the member states. The member states use the European Commission and the European Parliament, and they meet in the European Council to achieve their national interests, understanding that they should negotiate and compromise with each other, because maintaining some degree of unity is necessary for them to achieve their national interests. But some of these national interests are more performative, like British concerns over sovereignty, which of course became, I guess, to some extent, performance becomes substance. How much impact does Britain leaving the European Union formally had on the British economy? Well, it's hard to know because the world has been overwhelmed with the pandemic and reacting to the pandemic. So whatever British losses or economic suffering that they've experienced, it might well be there, but it's washed over by the ocean of the pandemic, the deepest economic downturn since the 1930s, and then the massive public expenditures of these national governments to recover from the pandemic. So the governance focus of this book is evident in the country chapters. So let me just show you, for example, I think I have some, I thought I had, maybe I don't, I have it from another class, but here, by the way, Mario Draghi has now become the president of Italy, or not the president, the prime minister of Italy. And Italy, there's been hopes by commentators, at least, for example, in the New York Times and elsewhere, that Italy under Mario Draghi would become a more effective, strong actor in the European Union. Now that, of course, the British have left the European Union, and Germany is going through some changes with Angela Merkel, who was there for, I think 16 years she was prime minister. And Olaf Scholz being an unknown character. And then, of course, there was concern about Emmanuel Macron and his position, which has now been stabilized by winning the second round of the election against Marine Le Pen, that can Italy step up? You see, Italy had a reputation of being a weak state after World War II. I still think on average, if you average out the number of governments, official governments, that Italy has had since end of World War II to the present, it still works out to about one government per year. Now, those prime minister positions circulated among a small group of people, the same small group of people over the decades, and parties, but the Italian government didn't look particularly strong and stable to play an important role in providing leadership for the European Union if its government was so fragile. And so now that Italy has changed, along with the other changes in Europe, including the end of the Cold War, that Italian governments are lasting longer. And then Mario Draghi brings the charisma and authority to Italy that he, as the second European Central Bank director, he gets all of this international prestige for his big bazooka, for example, that he led the European Union through the Greek sovereign debt crisis when there was talk that Greece might have to leave the European Union. And so he is getting a lot of credit. But again, it shows that even when the credit comes to for the being an effective leader in the European Union institution, the European Central Bank, that is still related to his political authority in Italy, in a member state, in a nation state. So again, this focus on strengthening Italy's governance, because there's been concern for over 20 years that Italy is the next Greece, that the Italian state is also seriously weak in terms of able to implement the rule of law, that there's tremendous corruption, that there are policies that were adopted during the Cold War that no longer are sound, like in Greece. Like, for example, my father's family is a working class poor family, was a working class poor family in Italy. My aunt, she worked as a store clerk in a retail shop in the train station, selling, I don't know, cameras or whatever. She retired when she was 55. I mean, how can you retire when you're 55? And that was true in Greece too. There are reasons why the retirement age was so low in Greece and in Italy. And part of the explanation, not sufficient, but has to be the Cold War. That the Italian government was questionable because of intervention by Moscow and Washington in the internal politics of Italy after World War II. I mean, I think I showed you, right? We keep talking about the Cold War in this class. I showed you this at the beginning of the semester. I have my passport from Italy, and this is the symbol of the Italian Republic, adopted after Mussolini was overthrown and killed. This was decided in the 1940s after World War II. And look what the leaders of Italy chose to put in this symbol of the Italian Republic. A red star of communist power within a gear, for example, the manufacturing industry, and looks like what, wheat and barley or whatever, grains, the peasants, the farmers. So this gives you a sense of how influential and how charismatic the Italian Communist Party was. Because like in France, the Italian Communist Party claimed and was given credit to being the resistance against the German and fascist occupation, particularly after Italy switched sides in 1943. That they fought a guerrilla war against the Germans. So the Americans were intensely concerned that the Communist Party of Italy was going to come to power in Italy after World War II. And so the Americans, CIA, and the KGB in Moscow funded their respective clients within Italy that wanted their help, Moscow or Washington's help. And so it was just an open secret that there was electoral fraud in Italy up through the 1970s, manipulation of ballots, ballot stuffing. And the Italians knew it, and the Greeks knew it, and that was one source of the terrorism, so-called terrorism that we saw in Italy and Greece during the 1970s, the years of lead, as it was called in Italy. And so the Italian police and authorities responded with force, but they also responded with utilitarian. Remember we talked about utilitarian control, coercion, utilitarian. You know, it's not so bad in Italy. Sure, it's a corrupt state, and we don't really have control of our own fate because the CIA is paying off all these people that basically work more for the CIA than do for Italy. But hey, it's Italy, and you can retire when you're 55. It's okay. And if you don't shut up, we'll shut you up. But if you do shut up, it's not so bad here. And then, of course, those economic imbalances escalated, and then the Cold War ended. And so Italy has to change, and so does Greece. And that means raising the retirement age. And, you know, I know that my father retired when he was 55, and you tell me, no, I got to retire when I'm 65. What? I've been planning my whole working life that I was going to retire like everybody else did, and now you're telling me I have to work another 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years? Well, I'm not going to just accept that. I'm going to fight it. I'm going to resist it. So, and so the Italian state has been going through changes, and the Italians, like the Greeks, less so obviously than the British, they have an inferiority complex, that they are kind of embarrassed by their state, and they view the European Union as a route by which to modernize Italy and modernize Greece. And that's part of the charisma that Mario Draghi has, that he is a great Italian who played a critical role in this European integration process, and now can he do the same thing in Italy, or something like that in Italy? And the Greek officials in the IMF and the European Union financial system also played a critical role in carrying out Greek changes. So, it goes on here, of course, and then during the pandemic, we saw Mario Draghi, who I think, by the way, he's not only Italian, he's an Italian Jew, which is also interesting, considering how, you know, Jewish anti-Semitism is always an element in European nationalism. That the Italian Prime Minister seized a shipment of vaccines destined for Australia during the pandemic, because, again, within the context of Australia being part of the British Commonwealth, and these vaccines being produced by a Swedish British company, AstraZeneca, and that the British were supposedly supposed to supply the European Union with those vaccines, and they didn't. So again, a bold, strong action by Mario Draghi that kind of impressed people, that Italy would never have done something like that previously. And it also demonstrated that Mario Draghi, renowned as the former European Central Bank president, who helped save the euro, was prepared to lead Europe from behind, where Italy was found for itself for years, lagging its European partners' economic dynamism and much needed reforms. And by the way, Mario Draghi's Italy is one country, probably more so along with Greece, that's taking full advantage of all of the economic resources being made available in the Next Generation program adopted last year in the European Union that focuses on that 750 billion euros. Each of these countries had to submit a plan to the European Commission about what they would do with the money that they would be allocated. And Italy and Greece's plans were the most developed, according to this University of Illinois professor who gave a talk on this 6 days ago that I watched on Zoom. He actually looked at the program. I think I told you, right, that 30% of the money has to be towards digital internet development, 30% has to be towards green development. And Italy and Greece, they have submitted plans, unlike the other member states, to maximize their access to these resources. And the fact that Mario Draghi obviously knows the European Union certainly helps prepare that process. So again, highlighting how Mario Draghi is leveraging his close relationships with Angela Merkel and so on, and Macron. Of course, this is from last year. Macron is facing tough elections next year. Ursula von der Leyen came under criticism. So at home, Mr. Draghi's vaccine gambit in March provided political red meat to an Italian population starved for vaccines and a sense of agency, but it was calculated to improve Europe's leverage as a whole. And so last week, Draghi, who is by turns droll and wonky, but always direct, kept the pressure on Brussels when it came to vaccine exports. And he's not a young man, right? So he's got to be 74 now. And he would like to become president of Italy, but there was some talk about him becoming president, which is more of a ceremonial role, but it wasn't politically feasible to find somebody to replace him who would keep out the far-right populists. So he is condemned to remain prime minister of Italy, even though I think he would rather not be under so much pressure. Okay, so again, everybody's praising Mario Draghi, and so of course maybe the situation will improve insofar as now Emmanuel Macron is now been reelected, but now we have this war in Ukraine, and again highlighting how the other leaders of the European Union. This is a year ago that had some problems, including the current president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, former defense minister of Germany under Angela Merkel, but she is apparently recovered, because I have not heard much criticism about her. There was criticism about how the European Union negotiated its access to vaccines. I mean, that was the big story. You might remember, right? A year ago, when are we going to get vaccinated? Give me a vaccine. Who gets the vaccine first? Teachers, right? I mean, I think the first people that I know of in Ohio that got the vaccine, aside from old people in retirement homes, was school teachers, so that they could go back to class. And I think it was in March last year that they began getting vaccines. So that was the environment at the time. And so given what we've said off so far, would you please respond to the following statement? The liberal nationalism of the European nation state is a necessary driver of European integration. Keep that in mind, right? Nationalism can associate with other values. Nationalism can associate with liberal values, and it can associate with authoritarian values, like it did in the 1930s, right? Polish nationalism in the 1970s was all about liberalism. Why? Because they're under communist totalitarian imperial conquest. They were under a communist totalitarian regime imposed by a foreign power, Moscow. So guess what? Polish nationalists are talking about democracy, self-determination, free enterprise. They're talking in liberal values. But then, 30 years after the Cold War ends, we see this shift, including in places like Poland and Hungary, towards what Viktor Orban calls illiberal nationalism. No, illiberal democracy. Illiberal democracy. Democracy, rule of the people, not these cosmopolitan European elites that want us to, acknowledge gay marriage as something that should be normal. Or that we should allow Muslim refugees into Hungary. So, but is that a factor? I mean, that given now we've got Putin's regime in Moscow being stereotyped as Sauron in Mordor, the evil empire. And again, I keep hearing on the news reports, interviewing people in Ukraine, they call the Russian troops the orcs, Orkiv, of the orcs. And again, we see this push towards integration of the European Union in response to this challenge, this threat, not integration, but reunification of the European Union by Poland and other countries against the supposed threat from Mordor, from Baradur, from Moscow. Is it true that this liberal nationalism of the European nation state is a necessary driver of European integration? And so let me ask you that question. And of course, there's no necessarily right or wrong answer, but I would like to hear your thoughts on it. And so we go to, so can you please vote? And make sure you're able to see this. And because, in other words, is everybody, I think everybody, one other person, I don't know if everybody signed on, but if you answer yes, then is it good to have a common enemy that's not liberal, like Putin's Russia, or Stalin's Soviet Union, or Beijing, Xi Jinping's Beijing, an authoritarian common adversary? So I'm not like the bad guy. I'm opposite to the bad guy. So I'm liberal and democratic. Has that always been a driver of European integration? So, I mean, some of you, like Gloria and Anais from Europe, I get a sense that sometimes advocates of the European Union don't want to believe that. No, 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 no. We don't need a common enemy. We're about peace. We're not about common enemies and looking for common foes. No. But a realist, which again, you might study in your international relations class when you take international relations and political science, one of the foundational theories is realism. And realism does view people are able to cooperate, but typically countries cooperate when they have a common foe. Cooperation otherwise tends to break down without a common enemy. And it's kind of an important question. Does the European Union, which claims that it's a peace strategy for Europe and the world, that Europe stands for the rule of law, not only in Europe, but the rule of law around the whole world. Is it really a peace strategy, or is it likely also to look for, and if you can't find it, manufacture a common enemy? That's depressing as all hell. But if it's true, I don't want to believe it's true, but well, let me ask you to elaborate a bit. So let's go to the breakout rooms, and I think well, if we only have 3 people signed up, I just put you in one group. Okay. Huh? Okay. You don't have a power pack with you? Okay. I mean, you want to use mine? I don't think it works, though. I don't know. Okay. Okay, because I have my power pack in my backpack. Okay. Okay. Oh, yeah, you're okay. Okay. So let's then, so here we are, Gloria and Sarah, and where's Anais? And where is Ella? Are you able to join, Ella? Okay, so where do you fit on this scale then, as to whether or not you strongly agree, neutral cannot decide, disagree, strongly disagree on this issue, that the liberal nationalism of the European nation state is a necessary driver of European integration. And it's, this is, again, one of the reasons why I like doing these exercises, because it makes me think through what I've been reading about over the years. This is the standard view it's covered in the book when they cover the work of Andrew Moravcsik. And Andrew Moravcsik came up with a theoretical conceptualization of European integration called liberal intergovernmentalism. That he emphasizes, he doesn't use the term liberal nationalism. He comes up with a term to describe his theory being liberal intergovernmentalism. So if I go to the notes, and I think if I do a keyword search, it should come up. And he said, yeah, it's the member states that drive the European Union. Yeah. 3 assumptions coming from the pre-Europeanization are highlighted here. That the EU strengthens the member state. It conforms with liberal intergovernmentalism. This notion that the European Union serves the national interests of the member states. European integration happens because the European member states want it to happen. And they're liberal rulers, so they're not like Hitler's and Mussolini's and Franco's. They are rulers of regimes that have democratic, political, and economic institutions, and they keep that kind of regime. And that kind of regime to survive, they have to cooperate. Because if they engage in cutthroat social competition, what was called beggar thy neighbor policies, for example, in the early 1930s that helped contribute to the Great Depression, that I'm going to keep you from exporting to my country because I want to protect my local producers and manufacturers from your competition, and then you do the same thing to me, we end up all being worse off and poor. We learn that the hard way. The U.S. is guilty of that too with the Smoot-Hawley Act at the beginning of the Great Depression. We're going to protect American markets and American producers from foreign imports, and the result was that the global economy broke down, and that helped bring about the Great Depression. That helped make the Great Depression even worse than it was. I mean, when the stock market collapsed in October 1929, that wasn't the start of the Great Depression. It didn't have to continue, but the reaction of the governments of the world to it made it worse. So this is the point of liberal governmentalism, that we need to cooperate, but we're cooperating to each pursue our own respective national interests as we understand them in Luxembourg, Greece, Germany, France, Spain, wherever. But we do know we have to cooperate. And so this is the term developed from Andrew Moravchik. I use this term liberal nationalism, basically it means the same thing. But, well, I should take that back. Nationalism typically means I want to assert my country's national influence when it's got a problem or a challenge from other actors. When my country's national influence in the form of the state is somehow challenged, either in terms of threat, you want to conquer me, you want to eat up part of my country, you want to humiliate me, or opportunity. Now we can establish the German Thousand-Year Reich in Europe because you're so degenerate. We've got this great opportunity for us to exploit. Does that mean you have to have an adversary, whether a target for opportunity or a target to defend against? That seems to be the essence of nationalism. There's got to be some kind of problem. The problem can be an opportunity that you need to exploit if you have the will and determination under Hitler. Or you got to deal with a terrible threat, a Mordor. And we got to deal with this stereotype threat. And so liberalism can be a useful tool to deal with the type of threat. If your threat that you perceive as Stalinist, totalitarian, communist imperialism, guess what? We stand for liberalism and democracy because that's what we are against the bad guy. Who's your bad guy? And you'll be the opposite of it. So that's what I've been thinking about. By the way, I'm not the only one to think about this. There was this guy was popular discussion here when I was in Bulgaria in the 1990s. He was Hitler's jurist. He was Hitler's legal theorist. And he supposedly, I've not read his work, but he supposedly has written the best political theory critiques of democracy. That we look for somebody to understand what are the weaknesses and problems of liberal democratic political regimes. His work is always referenced. And he, fled Germany when Nazism was defeated, and he went to Madrid, Spain, where Franco, of course, was still ruling until 1985. So if you're interested in, I want to read somebody criticizing democracy, you're supposed to read this guy. If you can see him here, because I don't know if, it's really sharing the screen. You can see, like, this person is really influential among the neoconservatives in the United States, Paul Wolfowitz and Robert Kagan and others. Slavoj Žižek, he's a Slovenian theorist who got all sorts of coverage. He's still popular, particularly in Europe, but I learned about him in Bulgaria. So he influenced a lot of people. But he's the one who talks about that politics has always got an enemy. There's always somebody that's an outgroup. He doesn't use the term outgroup, but there's always some target that motivates cooperation. He's talking in philosophical terms. He's not talking in political, psychological, or social psychological terms. He's a philosopher. And so, when you see what's going on with the rise of, so that's the kind of issues I've been struggling with in terms of what to make of how polarization, Trumpism, and then the supposed resolidification of democratic alliances against the evil empire of Vladimir Putin. What's going on here? And again, keeping in mind, since I'm the old man here, how, back 30 years ago when the Cold War ended, everybody wanted to dance and sing like, the Cold War's over. Oh my gosh, now we will have an episode of global peace and prosperity. Francis Fukuyama's End of History, right? It's published. He's always saying, well, I didn't really mean, that history would end. But of course, that's what he said. Well, if I can find it here. Francis Fukuyama, End of History. He wrote his book, that now we all understand that democracy and capitalism is the way of the world, and he was a political scientist, and he was known for his book, The End of History and the Last Man. See, 1992, a year after the Soviet Union disintegrated. And he's always been walking that back 30 years since. Well, I didn't really mean that, you know, we're going to see the end of political controversies and ideological. No, I didn't mean that. And he's a neocon. He was a neoconservative. And so that was the world when I was your age, or a little bit older than that, right? When I was 29, 30 years old. And so what do you think? Who's going to let's go here. Oh, nice. Heads. It's tails on east. So nice. Fit on the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you clicked. You agree. You agree. And so why do you agree? You don't think European integration can occur without nationalism? That you have to have Italian nationalism, German nationalism, French nationalism, but led by liberal leaders for this to work, for this project to work? Well, it can. I mean, nationalism is I think, inherently exclusive. But oh, we love Ukrainian immigrants because they come as immigrants fleeing the evil empire that we all hate. So, and of course, in the United States, it was the easiest people of Latin America to get American citizenship during the Cold War from Cuba. There was a law passed after Castro came to power in the communist revolution in Cuba in 1960, that a law was passed that said anybody from Cuba, if they set a foot on American territory, if they somehow got to Florida or crossed the border, that they automatically could apply for residency. They were not deported. They were not kept in detention camps the way we were seeing with Mexicans and Haitians and Guatemalans. And no. And why? Because we hated Castro. Washington hated Castro, the supposed minion of the evil empire of the Soviet Union. So we loved Cuban refugees. So, but there was always this, of course, it was less of an issue 30, 50, 60 years ago. But now you see it today. Poland, we don't want any Muslims. We don't want any black people from Africa. But yes, bring in Ukrainians. And the Americans also are making it easy for Ukrainians to come to the United States because there are already lots of Ukrainians, and the fact that they're white Europeans and Christians has something to do with it. So yeah, it can be open to immigration, but the right kind of immigration. And Ella, where did you fit on this? Yeah. I mean, you see the disruptions with European integration before this latest crisis with the Law and Justice Party and Viktor Orban's party, and then Brexit, of course. Like, if European integration, liberal nationalism is a necessary driver of European integration, that might be a counter-argument against it, because the British are a liberal democracy, and that liberal democracy produced Brexit. So it's not just liberal nationalism, it's the unique history. I mean, again, the British have a stronger sense, they're more nationalistic than the Italians and the Germans and the French and the Spanish, because nationalism in Europe has been more humiliating to Italy and Germany and France. To adopt a nationalistic policy, what did that give you? Mussolini and Hitler. And even under France, they won World War I, but it was such a high cost that nationalism has not been a particularly wonderful experience for the French. De Gaulle had to come to power to get France out of Algeria, but not until 1 million people died. But the British, if you're a typical British nationalist, I'm not saying it's true, you've got nothing to be ashamed of. British Empire won the First and Second World War. The British Empire was the only European great power still standing against Hitler because Hitler had made a deal with Stalin in 1939 before the Americans got bombed by the Japanese. You've got nothing to be ashamed of. And you've got the whole world that is the former British Empire that you can, this is the way Nigel Farage and Brexit supporters were talking. We don't need a European Union. We've got Canada, we've got Australia, we've got the United States, we've got India, all of South Asia, who share our legal traditions, who share our language, and our, as I mentioned, our legal traditions, the common law. I mean, this is what Nigel Farage, you can find on YouTube. You know, I used to show those clips in class. So, nationalism plays a role, but countries do change. I mean, Germany today is not like Germany of 90 years ago or 80 years ago. It's much less nationalistic. And why? For a lot of factors, including historical learning. Communities do change. They do fail and they do learn. But the British, they never fail. What? They lost the American Revolution. Okay. But that was a long time ago, and besides, they're still our best buddies, the Americans. So, Gloria, where you disagree? Why do you disagree, Gloria? Gloria?
Yep, I'm here.
Why do you disagree?
So I disagree because obviously, I mean, nationalism for me, I have a pretty bad vision of it because I live in Europe and I saw the failures of nationalism, and I don't know how I can associate the two words liberal and nationalism, because that's pretty clear that in Europe they may talk about liberal nationalism, but their nationalism is way more conservative, may I say. So I was thinking it that way because I don't see how they could handle a liberal one, because as we can see now with the Ukraine and Russia and everything, there is no liberal. There is just conservative nationalism, really tough and sticky, who really stuck in people's throat and made them do things that they will regret, and made them think about foreigners in a way that I can just not, I can't handle it. And there is a lot of failures about it. So yeah, I wish that European integration could be done without it. So that was my word for that statement.
Okay, so so then we can go. Let's go back to the notes then. And we have to have half an hour for the debate. I'm wondering if I should shut down my computer now, or no, we should do the debate now. So again, let's look at the debate topic, because I have to shut down this computer and then go to my laptop, and I don't want to shut down this computer before I think we want to do the debate on the computer. So we go to the debate, and okay, so yeah, so let's do the debate. Where do I have the debate here? Okay, so to South Koreans, if Europe can Europeanize, then Asia can Asianize. And I am pro. So let me show you how I'm going to do something. I set up voting page on the cyberspace so that you can try. This is the first time I've done this. Try to vote and evaluate pro and con on the opening statement that follow presentation style. But 10 different votes you have to do this debate. And one is, who won the debate, great debate. And everything is anonymous. It's all anonymous. All this is anonymous. Of course, you're evaluating me, the pro, as well as con. And let's do this on this computer so that we have enough time to do this. So, and then we can use the microphones. They can hear us. And so let's go to the big topic. The big topic. Who wanted to be if Europe can Europeanize and Asianize. So numbers are 6 in terms of the time, 66473, right? 66473. And I will use my my timer on my computer clock here to do the timer. So I'm going to start first, and I'm going to I'm going to speak for 6 minutes, and then Ella will speak for 6 minutes, and then I will make my opening statement that if you're Europeanized, so I'll start now. Okay, so So, ladies and gentlemen, again, I think I pointed this out on your your weekly paragraph, that Europeanization is just simply a shorthand form of the word as a word for European integration. So if Europe can integrate, then Asia can integrate, because if Europeanization is the short form of European Union integration, then let's define what integration is. Integration, from my point of view, is the conscious, explicit, ideological acceptance of what is fundamentally true, whether or not we consciously accept it or not, that we live in a fundamentally interdependent world. In other words, your well-being depends upon my well-being depends upon your well-being. And it might always have been true that the well-being of everybody ultimately depends upon the well-being of everybody else. But the problem with nationalism is that it makes us stupid. Nationalism leads to stereotyping. I say makes us stupid to make the point that nationalism, emotion, and stereotyping, they all go together. And stereotyping means gross oversimplification, not understanding them or not caring that we're interdependent. You see that right now with regard to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that this Ukrainian state is an affront and a threat to Russian national identity. Rightly or wrongly, that's what is the prevailing view in Moscow today. And the Russians will pay a incredibly high economic price to deal with that fundamental perceived existential threat to what it means to be Russian. So that shows you the threat of nationalism to understanding what is a fact. And as Katya Gloria just mentioned, when these nationalist crises or upsurges, we may then regret what we did. Oh my God, it's like getting incredibly drunk and then waking up the next morning with a terrible hangover. Oh, I regret I drank so much. I'm so sick now. Oh my God. But we really liked doing it when we were doing it. We went, and that is an aspect of what nationalism does. And I understand that nationalism is a challenge in Asia when you have big China with 1.4 billion people, and you have Korea, north and south, only 72 million, Japan, 110, 120 million, that how can you Asianize Asia? How can you integrate Asia? It can, however, be part of an explicit decision, like among the European member states, which are roughly equal in size, 60 million Italians, 63 million French, 80 million Germans, 65 million British, and so on, that they will constantly collaborate, cooperate, and coordinate their policies. That's all it is. And if the elements and agreements can be reached to deal with, if they were to pursue this Asian Union, as Hatoyama, the former Prime Minister of Japan, has been promoting, obviously to deal with that power discrepancy between China and the other nations of Asia. I mean, obviously Hatoyama must not be a silly person. He understands that China is really big and everybody else is really small compared to China. So what are his plans? Well, of course, if the European Union is going to be a model for an Asian Union,
in some sense. It's not going to exactly copy the institutions of the European Union. Just like, for example, the African Union. You've heard of the African Union. The African Union was explicitly created using the European Union as a model. But of course, the African Union doesn't look exactly like the European Union in terms of its institutions. It grew out of the Organization of African Unity, but then it was reformed and changed. I think in the 1990s, the African Union was launched. I have to go back and check Wikipedia. But they explicitly focused on the European Union as a model. Other countries creating regional international associations all look to the European Union as a model. It's just that, a model. Of course, it can't be just completely adopted the same way from this European Union and those institutions recreated in the Asian Union. Of course not. I mean, I can imagine a scenario whereby there would be the European and Asian Union would be more intergovernmental, that they wouldn't have an Asian parliament. And of course, what do you include in Asia? I mean, India's pretty big too. So why couldn't an Asian Union include India as a counterbalance to China? It's about the same size and it's a democracy. I mean, Asia is a large area of the world that includes many countries besides China, and one of which is the same population size as China, although the Indian economy is still only like 1/6 the size of China's economy. So what is so difficult with accepting that the Asian peoples would agree to consciously and formally cooperate, coordinate, and collaborate in making their domestic policies? And starting out with, and their international trade policies, the way the European states began, first with the European Coal and Steel Community, and then moving towards coordinating, collaborating on international trade to form a trade customs union. And so that's where I'll stop there. And so Ella will now make her opening statement. And okay, and so you can.
Okay, thanks. All right, I say that Asia cannot Asianize because of a few key reasons. I say that Asia lacks cohesion as a whole because of nationalistic tendencies and political views. Asia does not have the conditions or the pressure to Asianize, as well as the motive. Asian diversity as well as history stops cohesion as well, and there are already too many outside influences for Asia to Asianize solely on Asian terms. So I'd say we also have to define Europeanization and Asianization, as the terms themselves are theoretical and sometimes can be misinterpreted. So what is Europeanization? As my debate partner said, that integration is, or Europeanization is shorthand for European integration. I stuck to the textbook definition that Europeanization refers to processes of construction, diffusion, and institutionalization of formal and informal rules. Basically, shorthand for the same thing, it is basically European integration. And Asianization is not defined in our book, but how I viewed it is that there are two possible forms of Asianization. If we go off the book definition, simply the integration of culture and policies without a union or official political structure, or the integration using a political structure like the EU that facilitates integration on an international political level as well as national. So my main points that Asia cannot Asianize is that they lack motive. They're suspicious of each other, they're nationalistic, and they stereotype each other. As my debate partner said, nationalism it makes us stupid. It leads to stereotyping and gross oversimplification like Russia and Ukraine. My second point is that they lack a crisis or motivation. My debate partner says that they would consciously collaborate in a union, but why would they consciously collaborate if there is no greater motivation? Why would they leave their sovereignty or their national interests behind to collaborate in a union? And that is my second point. My third point is that they're quite large, diverse, and have a history far longer and older than Europe. So with India and China, there's two very different cultures that you have there, and two very different and large, I guess, differences. And oops, oh geez, what did I do? Yeah, so they're very large and diverse, and Europe has a problem with nationalism and diversity, and we can see that later. So, and my fourth point is there is already too much outside influence in Asia's affairs for an Asian integration that is solely Asian. China and Russia have a relationship, as well as Korea and Japan have a relationship with the US, which strains some relationships between these three countries equally. So for an Asian integration that is solely Asian, I can't see the US allowing Korea and Japan to be on friendly terms with China, or Russia allowing China to be on friendly terms with Korea and Japan. And my sixth point is Asia can't Asianize because the big powers are already divided. I would say the three big powers are China, Korea, and Japan. Also, we could point to India, but I'm not sure they would be included in this type of, they could be included as a power balance, but I'm not sure these three East Asian countries would include a West Asian country. So I'd say Asia has the most strong nation states and strong nationalism compared to Western Europe. They also stereotype each other, and the stereotyping other nations is typical among the Asian states. There is a divide because of these stereotypes and because of the history that lies behind these stereotypes. This bars the process for Asianization to occur naturally and freely, and also bars Asianization from coming from a political structure as all the countries are suspicious of the others. My debate partner said they would consciously collaborate and deal with power discrimination deal with power discrimination, and agreements can be made to pursue an Asian union. But why would they pursue an Asian nation? What is the motive behind the collaboration, the conscious collaboration of these nations? And my second point is that the EU formed out of crisis, and because of liberal nationalism, it's very common for the EU to have a common enemy and to be stronger in the face of a common enemy, whether it is fabricated or not. If they see an enemy, they will knit together. And I believe that Asia does not have a common enemy as a whole right now. If they want to integrate, they will need to find or manufacture a common enemy because of liberal nationalism versus like other communism or authoritarianism. However, in Asia, there are different types of governments. There is communism in China, and then there's capitalism in Japan and Korea. As again, I talk about the big three. So I would say for a motive for these countries to consciously collaborate for agreements to be made, there has to be a common enemy between all of these states. There has to be a motive to come together and integrate, or integration simply will not happen on the level that it should. Asia today faces no such motivation. There is no common enemy or fight. There is not even a perceived enemy. In fact, since China possibly sees Asianization as a way to reclaim power over Asia, Korea and Japan see China in a less positive light and may be skeptical to join in any political or social integration. I believe that this is a bar between trust and cooperation. And yeah, I think that's all for my statement. I have 6 seconds left.
Does anybody have any questions for pro and con? If not, then I will make my statement here, and I speak for 4 minutes. So let me go back to 4 minutes here and start. Okay, so of course, yes, ladies and gentlemen, remember the European Union as a peace strategy aims to encourage also peaceful domestic change in the member states of Europe. Keep in mind, the European coal and steel community started off with 6 countries, one partitioned by the United States and its allies and the Soviet Union's allies. So we called that West Germany when I was a college student. And then France and Italy, and then Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Europe was an incredibly diverse place politically. You had these post-war, post-fascist liberal democracies with fragile liberal democratic systems in Italy, and also
a weak, fragile democratic system in France. You had Germany, which was coming out of the Hitler tyranny, and it's being occupied with hundreds of thousands of soldiers with nuclear weapons pointed at each other. So you had to stabilize these young democratic post-World War II regimes. You had fascist regimes under Franco in Spain and Salazar in Portugal. You had a communist insurgency uprising in Greece immediately after World War II. You had communist totalitarian dictatorships being imposed in Eastern Europe, in Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, and elsewhere. So the point is, Europe was an incredibly diverse, politically diverse place, and diverse in many ways, including diverse in politics, diverse in economics, not to mention diverse in cultures. And so what did European integration do? It provided a model or a beacon or a source of soft power to encourage the peaceful transition or transformation of Europe away from these cruel authoritarian despotic regimes, whether Franco's regime in Spain or even the communist regime in communist regimes in Eastern Europe. I mean, any explanation for why the Cold War ended and the Berlin Wall came down and communism ended in Eastern Europe has to include European integration. So, of course, to start Asian integration, you wouldn't start with China and North Korea and Myanmar. Who would be the beginnings of Asian integration? Would be South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, the advanced developed democracies, and serve as a model for the rest of Asia, and also including the ASEAN countries, at least the ones that are democratic, right? Like the ones that have a more stable democratic traditions would cooperate more closely with, in this imagined scenario, with South Korea and Taiwan and Japan, maybe Australia. Bring in Australia as well. It's part of what the Americans call the Indo-Pacific region, and New Zealand. Bring in New Zealand, and of course the United States could play some important role, like it played an important role in European integration. I mean, that was, I think, one of the, again, you could say that was one of the models of what was then called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Donald Trump rejected, negotiated, beginning as an initiative by, I think, was Singapore and New Zealand to try to create a free trade area in Asia, in the Pacific area. And then the US bought into it, thought it was a good idea. And that included Mexico, Chile, Canada, Australia, as well as I think I mentioned Singapore, and then eventually the Japanese were brought into it, and then the Americans, after Trump won, left. Again, drawing upon the experience of European integration. And so I think I need to stop there and stop. Dismiss. Okay. So so Khan will speak second time to rebut.
Open. Okay, so sorry. So what my debate partner said was that the Cold War ended because of the EU and its role in the Cold War. And I would rebut that by saying the EU was powerful due to the EU was so powerful due to integration because they saw the Cold War and Russia as either as an enemy. They were so cohesive and were able to integrate because they saw an enemy in Russia, in Moscow, in the Soviet Union. Yet they were a powerful influencer in Europe because of the way they saw Russia. They were powerful because they were able to integrate under pressure. And I think Asia still doesn't face this pressure. Now, as to the idea of not just, having a coalition of, North Korea and China and Myanmar, I think, instead having a coalition of South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, all the democracies, I would rebut that by saying, why would China allow that? Since they are democratic, why would China not see that as a possible threat? Having these powerful democracies come together as a peace front, or as China would probably view it, as a threat, such as Russia sees the EU as a flip side of NATO. So why would China allow a coalition that China isn't a part of, that China can't see over? Because in a peace strategy, you'd have theoretically both sides of the coin in a coalition or in a union. So I believe that Asia cannot Asianize if without China, without South Korea, without all of these powers coming together. But then again, these powers also need a motive and resources. And I believe they're capable, but there is again lack of motive and lack of resources. So I believe that in the book there are some pitfalls where Europeanization fails, especially the areas of policy compliance. And this is on page 289. And I'd say that this is kind of you'd say it was a model as to where it could be where Asia could fail if they were to make a union. But again, I'm going back to they needed a motive to make a union. And I'd say there is no common enemy in Asia, and there is no threat from anyone in Asia. And in fact, they could see threats from each other. So, and then you mentioned that the United States, possibly Australia, could have a role in Asian integration. This is true, but the US, Europe, and Russia still have power and influence over Asia, and I'd say that they are even a divisive factor in Asia. And this bars the way for Asianization that is truly Asian on Asian terms. So I have a quote from actually your feedback. And it says, as to Asia Asianizing, some skeptics have pointed out that Chinese nationalism views Asianization as an effective meaning the political recentering of the approach to Asia affairs shifting back to China, where it was before the Europeans, the Japanese, and the Americans usurped it. So Koreans, Japanese, and other Asians are more likely to react skeptically to Chinese calls of balancing US influence in that area. So this shows that outside influence affects all Asia and its cohesion to work together. So I'd say it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. If you include China, then the other countries are going to be more skeptical of this integration of this union. If you don't include China, then why would China not see that union as a threat, like Russia sees the EU as just simply a flip side of NATO? So I believe that Asianization, if it were to work, needs a motive. It needs a solid enemy for the states to come together and integrate against. It needs to start off with solely Asia, as in no outside actors and no influence from outside actors. And unfortunately, again, it comes down to the decision of including China or other communist countries or not. So I believe Asianization is possible, but as of right now, it cannot Asianize due to the lack of motive, resources, and not the lack of capability. Diversity made things complex in Europeanization, true, and it was overcome because the nations wanted to Europeanize. Even nationalism can be overcome by the right conditions if the offer is seen as good enough, see Chapter 9 on Poland. However, there is the lack of cohesion as well as no motive to Asianize. There is no crisis, again, or common enemy. Asia simply cannot Asianize due to the lack of motive, lack of motivation, and the problem of China, as well as the influence of outside forces which tear Asian cohesion apart. I have some more evidence that I can show. Let me just get it really quick. Okay, so in chapter 13, we talk about national institutions and affecting the EU. So in Asian Union or Asian integration, there are many different types of governments. Corruption is an issue, as well as these nations have already pointed this out, that corruption was also an issue in the early EU. And there's as well as conflicting interests like communism and capitalism, as you said earlier in the EU, this was also true. And with the compliance issues and national government impact, I'd say getting even part of Asia into a union or to integrate would be problematic. Like Bulgaria and the other small communist states were corrupt and still recovering when they joined the EU. However, there were still supports from the EU to keep them aligned in place and recovering. Asia would first need a strong integration process or strong union before accepting those of corrupt governments, which leads me to my next point. Asia can't have a strong foundation due to the three big powers fundamentally being incompatible. Oh, sorry. I believe my time's up. Yes.
3 minutes. And then when this is over, we will then go to the my laptop and we'll do our voting there. Okay, well, I think, ladies and gentlemen, of course, if we remember that integration doesn't necessarily mean peace. I mean, the challenge of the Soviet Union was a factor affecting early European integration. And so, yes, the challenge of China would affect early Asian integration, focusing on that small core of starting countries with the hegemony of the United States or support of the United States behind them, just like the European integration. A critical part of that environment was the hegemony of the United States back in the late 1940s and into the 1950s to explain European integration. So I don't see how the threat or challenge from China is a problem. In fact, it would be a motivation. Now, if my opponent is saying that well, if it makes China too much of a threat, then China could react in a belligerent, hostile manner. And again, the economic integration of China is a different factor. Of course, we can't just borrow the European experience and apply it without modifying it to the rest of the world, other regions of the world. Of course, China is integrating the capitalist world economy, critically so. So nobody, and Japan and the United States and Taiwan as well, they don't want to sacrifice their economies by trying to isolate themselves from Chinese economic influence. And of course, anything that human beings do, they can do it badly. They can make it worse. I'm just saying that the European Asian integration would be a beacon, could serve as a beacon, as a model of soft power appeal to encourage democratization of countries like North Korea, beginning with North Korea and China. I mean, if China reforms itself, North Korea inevitably is going to reform itself, right? And then also the other authoritarian, quasi-authoritarian states in Myanmar and Cambodia and elsewhere. But we have to start with the critical countries that are critically committed to liberal democracy and capitalism: South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, arguably Singapore, including New Zealand and Australia. And as I've been highlighting here, the West Africa basically move in this direction. Maybe an Asian Union would be more of a Pacific Union, an Asian Pacific Union, some kind of cooperation, collaboration, coordination to create soft power appeal that would encourage liberalization in these authoritarian states, like in predominantly, of course, China. Yeah, of course, China is the main focus, but we have to confront China with a system in which its appeal to the rest of the world is irresistible. And of course, China can see it as a threat, but China doesn't have a land border with Taiwan the way Russia has a land border with Ukraine. And of course, so the security conditions differ in terms of the hostile reaction of China to such a potentiality. Okay, so that's where we have to stop here. So I'm now going to close the Zoom here. And